This girl wears her hat literally everywhere. School, gym, the prom, on top of her hair dryer at the beauty parlor. I think we might have found Linus's soulmate.
Linus could do better. Welcome to Faith on Film, and an extra special welcome to our first Dabble in the Dark.
It's a popular trope in horror movies to incorporate elements of religion, and why not? There are elements in a lot of religious narratives that are frightening, such as the devil and hell, and every now and then a death plague. So every time Halloween rolls around, we're going to have a little bit of fun. And up first is the 1976 Brian De Palma classic, Carrie.
Based on the novel of the same name by none other than Stephen King himself, even though they spelled his name with a V in the trailer.
That's going to happen. He wasn't really Stephen King yet, you know. This is the first Stephen King adaptation of the first Stephen King book. And by the way, you might not want to watch the trailer if you don't want every bit of the story spoiled for you. Of course, you are also watching this review, so.
Well, the movie has a lasting legacy, including a nearly unrelated sequel, 2 remakes, and one of the biggest flops in Broadway history. Not that one. But all anyone really talks about is the climactic prom scene, so is the movie itself worthwhile, or is it just one memorable scene with a lot of build-up? Let's find out. This is Cassie.
It's Carrie! And it makes sense to start off by talking about the titular character. Sissy Spacek's performance is very iconic, especially at the end. Isn't that right, Brett Ratner?
But she shows off her acting chops throughout, emerging from this shy, overly emotionally stunted girl who's quite passive, growing in confidence, and then suddenly having the rug pulled out from under her quite cruelly. Her bully classmates rigged the election for prom queen to get her up on stage and then dump a bucket of pig's blood on her to humiliate her.
However, it just so happens that over the course of the movie, Carrie has been developing telekinetic powers. So it's all downhill from here.
Her character arc.
Boo!
Yes, I know. Her arc started when she got her first period in a shower after gym class. And the scene is uncomfortable, and I'm not sure if it's supposed to be. Okay, the characters are supposed to be from like 14 to 18, right? And for the most part, they pass for it pretty well.
Even though Sissy Spacek was actually 27 at the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Anyway, they're shown completely naked. And this wouldn't be so frickin' weird, except that the camera moves across the scene in intimate slow motion, with soft, tender music playing. I don't know what emotion this scene is going for, but I expected Chris Hansen to step out and ask the cinematographer to have a seat at any moment.
And this isn't just like for a few minutes, by the way. This is the entire opening credits. We were lucky that we were able to find a screen cap that we could use for YouTube. Anyway, the main thing you take away from this opening, at least for right now, is it's a perfect example of just how sheltered Carrie really is. This poor girl has no idea what is happening to her. She's never even heard of a period. She genuinely thinks that she is dying and starts to panic. It is actually very sad.
The other girls start mocking her, throw tampons at her, and then start chanting, "Plug it up, plug it up." As should come as no surprise to anyone, they get punished for this. And one girl in particular, Chris, feels that she did nothing wrong and blames Carrie entirely for her predicament, which is why she hatches the plan with the pig's blood that we mentioned earlier.
Though not everybody feels this way. There is this one girl named Sue Schnell who feels genuinely guilty about the way she treated Carrie. And as a way to make it up to her, unfortunately kickstarts the entire plot by asking her boyfriend, named Tommy Ross, who happens to be one of the most popular boys in school, to take Carrie to the prom instead of her.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I felt like the movie was trying to juggle too many characters during the second act. You could have had Tommy ask Carrie to the prom under his own power, and the story would have worked just fine. As it is, I spent so much of the time trying to figure out where all the moving pieces were and who was planning what about Carrie. I thought Sue was part of the prank plan for a long time, up until the climax.
I think it doesn't help that Chris does start hatching her plan before Sue even asks Tommy to take Carrie to the prom. So,
It looks like they're conspiring together.
right, because Chris's plan just kind of happens. There's a lot of luck that goes into Chris's plan, including they put the bucket of pig's blood up before they even decorate for the prom. So they're lucky that somebody didn't knock it over by mistake during the decorating process, and they're also lucky that nobody smelled it.
They're also lucky that Carrie went to the prom in the first place.
It's true. Anyway, yeah, with all these things considered, it is a little. You could easily mistake Sue for one of the
Conspirators.
until the climax, especially since this movie doesn't actually include the final confrontation between Carrie and Sue, where Carrie, who actually did think for basically the whole story that Sue was part of the plan, realizes that she wasn't, and maybe sorta possibly forgives her.
You read the book?
I saw the second remake, the better of the two remakes.
Well, to get back on track, I really come to like Carrie once she starts opening up. It'd be easy for her to never investigate her powers and then they're just suddenly in full swing at the prom. But no, she actually pretty quickly realizes what's going on and starts researching it. And the fact that she's looking into books of the occult in the first place is a major breakthrough for her because her mother is famously a whacked out Bible thumper. The scene where Carrie really starts to come alive for me is where she matter of factly tells her mother that she has these powers and knows how to use them. She demonstrates them in a sly act of defiance, no less.
It is kind of fun to watch. Ultimately, that is why this is a tragic end to this story, because Carrie is finally starting to come alive. She's starting to feel some semblance of confidence and some semblance of normalcy for the first time in her life. She has that really nice scene with that gym teacher, Miss Collins, one character who actually tries to be nice to her in the movie. Miss Collins overhears her talking badly about herself and takes her to the mirror and kind of walks her through step by step just how pretty she really is. It is a really sweet scene. It kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit. But Carrie really does take to heart that maybe she is somebody who is worth something. And we see her make her own prom dress, try some makeup on, some lipstick. She's actually kind of enjoying this. And then, of course, the disaster strikes, and just like that, she's right back to being the meek, passive mouse that she's been her whole life. She really just needs a hug in that finale from her mother. Yeah, okay. Margaret White, her mother, is the main reason I thought that this story could be a good faith on film in the first place.
You're not wrong. Mrs. White is a devout Christian, and by devout, I mean fundamentalist, with an emphasis on the mental.
And less on the fun.
Correct. One of her very first scenes features her finding out that Carrie had her first period, and then slapping her across the face for the sin of womanhood. She recites a mantra and forces Carrie to repeat it about how the weakness of the first woman doomed the human race. Intercourse was the first sin, and how women were to pay for it with the curse of blood.
That's not in the Bible.
To be fair, I'm pretty sure what Margaret is quoting here is some sort of theological handbook, not the Bible. But none of what she's actually saying was made up for this story.
Unfortunately.
There is a long-standing tradition that eating of the tree of knowledge was somehow a euphemism for doing it. And there is a tradition that periods were part of the curse laid upon women for it. But placing the blame entirely on the woman dates back even further.
Explains a lot of history, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Garden of Eden narrative is surprisingly malleable when it comes to what you want it to say about gender relations. Either Eve was subservient and usurped the natural order by means of her powers of seduction, or they were created equals, and subservience was a result of the curse, or Adam was actually to blame because he couldn't control his woman. It's a Gordian knot of interpretation and reinterpretation that I will not attempt to untie here.
Probably for the best.
But it serves our purposes to highlight the fact that there have been some deeply sexist interpretations which have indeed affected people.
Again, explains a lot of history, doesn't it? Margaret White is the embodiment of everything you imagine when you think about fundamentalist Christianity. She is right, you are wrong. Do not try to explain the Bible to her because she knows it all already.
Plus, she regularly locks Carrie in a closet to pray. That's not cool. Wait, did Harry Potter steal that plot point from this?
Huh. I never thought about it that way. There is a fan theory that's circulated. It's particularly popular in the Stephen King wiki that Margaret White might be an undiagnosed and untreated schizophrenic, and it's just gotten worse with age. That is entirely possible, but it's never really said anywhere. So while Carrie is without question a sympathetic character in this story, Margaret really isn't. She's really just as much, if not more, of an antagonist in her daughter's life than the bullies who torment her at school, which is saying something.
And Margaret is brought to frightening reality by Piper Laurie. This is very much a slow burn of a horror story in that there's not a kill every 10 minutes. Kind of like that other Stephen King story. But it is horrifying throughout just because of how domineering this woman is over her daughter.
Which is funny because Piper Laurie did not consider Carrie to be a horror movie. When she first read the script, she was convinced that it was a satire or, at the very least, a black comedy. And with lines like, pimples are the Lord's way of chastising you, can you really blame her?
You mean to tell me that she and De Palma were like a reverse George C. Scott and Stanley Kubrick on the set of Doctor Strangelove?
The important thing is, this is the movie that revived her career, and future Twin Peaks fans everywhere rejoiced.
She even decides that she needs to kill her daughter because she's a demon.
Now, to be fair to the raging psychopath, she actually said that thou shalt not suffer the witch to live, because she's convinced that Carrie is actually is a witch with powers from Satan. And oh my word, Margaret White actually quoted something that is from the Bible. How about that? But it's crazy. In her version of reality, she really does have to kill her child because she has powers from the devil. It, it's crazy. Mrs. White as a whole is so disconnected with reality that you gotta wonder how her day to day life operates. Like, how does she hold a job?
Hey, boss. You might want to get down here. Margaret's preaching hellfire to the customers again.
Does she know that's not her department?
Oh, she knows. We've told her multiple times.
I'll be right down.
I suppose that when we were introduced to Margaret, we did see Mrs. Schnell give her a $10 donation to kind of get rid of her. I suppose they could live off of hearty please go away donations? That's an awfully nice house for go away money.
It's also confusing trying to imagine her in a church.
Yeah.
Like, you would think that a minister or a priest or whoever would notice she's out of her gourd and say something.
Or
Unless
maybe,
he's also
yeah.
crazy. But that would imply an entire congregation of these nuts, and there's no indication that Margaret is anything other than a lone wolf.
True, she is kind of presented as the neighborhood nut job.
Yes, she is.
It's funny too. It's not really clear what denomination she really is. I mean, most of the iconography in the house is heavily Roman Catholic, but door to door evangelism is more of a Protestant thing, as is owning personalized Bibles. And we see Margaret White carrying the largest New Testament I think I've ever seen.
You must have a lot of notes.
Maybe. I mean, it is Margaret, so I'm sure it has a lot of. No, actually, no. Scribbling in the Bible is probably going to send you to hell, so I'll bet you she doesn't do that.
I bet in the margins it's okay.
Well, it's who knows.
Who knows?
But I gotta, and she also kind of talks more like a Southern Pentecostal. But I gotta admit, I kind of get a funny mental image just trying to imagine this lady church shopping.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Mrs. White. I'm the Reverend. I hope you can join us for coffee hour where you can meet my wife and kids.
You had intercourse multiple times! Don't you know that intercourse was the first sin?
Okay. Maybe we can kill two birds with one stone here and speculate that none of the churches she visited were strict and bizarre enough for her, so she deemed them all inferior and is going it on her own, pulling bits from this tradition here and that tradition there. It's not a canon explanation, but it's a suitable fan theory that fits the available explanation, that fits the available data.
And it would make sense for this character that nobody in town was as religious as she was, so I'll take it.
Carrie's powers definitely represent some sort of metaphor, but what?
Well, they do manifest that puberty, kind of like in the X-Men. Oh my word, that would be the best crossover. I'm just imagining. Okay, who finds her first? You think Professor Xavier, Magneto? I think Magneto in particular would just love Carrie.
Stick to this movie.
Aw.
That said, I think the most obvious subtext is that it's representative of her repressed sexuality, which Margaret has stuffed down deep. And the story plays really well as a narrative about a young girl who doesn't know anything about her body and thus inadvertently uses it for destructive ends. Which, now that I think about it, is literally what Chris does by enlisting her boyfriend on the prank by giving him a blowjob.
Hi, John Travolta.
John Travolta's in this movie?
Oh yeah, this was his big break.
How about that? Sidebar, her technique is terrible. Don't keep saying his name. You're just going to distract yourself and wind up using teeth. Bad.
On the surface, this is a very basic girl gets revenge on her tormentors story. But there is a lot of subtext going on here. Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering, that's not actually a crucifix, that is Saint Sebastian. Which I gotta admit is kind of strange because Saint Sebastian is not exactly an A-list saint like Patrick or Francis or Joan of Arc. And I think most people do mistake that for a crucifix, which is why I felt inclined to point it out.
I think it's because he's renowned for his good looks.
I did not know that.
So maybe Margaret is channeling her sex drive into her religious fervor through him. But the repression metaphor doesn't have to be strictly about sexuality. It's about anything and everything that Margaret has forced Carrie to deny about herself.
It's true, and she forces Carrie to deny everything about herself. Everything that she might have liked or disliked. It's really all needs to be with Margaret's approval, or it's in the prayer closet with you. I think that's why this story has left the impression that it has. Why it keeps interesting people enough that you would want to revisit it, want to remake it. I think everyone at some point in their life has related to Carrie in some way. Either you knew somebody like Carrie once upon a time when you were in school, or at some point maybe you were Carrie. A lot of people feel shy, feel lonely, feel isolated, feel like they just don't belong, that they're not normal, and that lack of normal just makes it hard to feel like a complete person. As Carrie says, she wants to be a whole person. And Spacek does such a good job in this part. She really does sell it. At the end of the story, you just want to hug her.
Preferably without stabbing her. Please? I'd never seen this movie before this review. I was only dimly aware of it, but I'm glad I finally saw it. I can see why it's edged its way into the cultural memory.
I had only seen the remake somehow. Well, because that happened to be the only version that was available on Netflix on a time, go figure. And I liked it just fine, but this the Palma movie is the better movie version of the story, with particular apologies to Julianne Moore. Though I will say that this movie does show its age a little bit. Like it is a product of the 70s, and that shows sometimes. That hair. And I think that the original music in this movie is very good, but I do think that they rely just a little too much on the shrieking violins of Psycho. I mean, that is one of the most iconic danger sounds in all of cinema, so it's a little distracting when a rendition of the shrieking violin plays every single time Carrie uses her powers. I know what movie you got that from.
Don't be silly. Psycho came out in 1998.
That was also a remake starring Julianne Moore.
Um, Quick, what rating do you give this, Carrie?
Well, I would say that Spacek herself is a money's worth. There's no question there. But I think on the whole, I'm going to give this one a satisfactory.
Yeah, I was wavering between that and good enough myself, but Satisfactory is a solid pick.
Yeah, it's a good movie. It's a good watch for Halloween.
It is. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Stephanie. Thank you for joining us for our first Dabble in the Dark. And we'll resume regular Faith on Film next time.
Did you know John Travolta was in this movie?
Pimples are the Lord's way of chastising.